The dining room at Whitfield Lodge held 22 tables on a good night, and on a bad night it held the same 22 tables with fewer chairs and a shorter patience from the man who ran the floor. Dale Whitfield stood near the service entrance with his arms crossed and his jacket buttoned, watching Nora Calloway reset a table that had been set correctly the first time. She knew it had been set correctly. So did he. The fork alignment was off, Dale said, loudly enough that the two guests at the adjacent table could hear it if they chose to listen. One of them did. When we have a full house, the details communicate the standard. You know that. Nora set the fork down without comment. She smoothed the linen with the flat of her palm, a single pass, and straightened up. She did not look at the guests. She did not look at Dale with anything that could be used against her. She said, "Of course," and moved to the next table. That was how it worked at the lodge. Dale gave the correction. Nora absorbed it. And the 12 staff members who watched the exchange learned the same lesson they learned every shift. That competence here was never acknowledged, only inspected for flaws. 2 years of that. 2 years of forks and water glasses and tone of voice, and the particular way Dale said, "Of course you know that," which was the same as saying he believed she did not. She had come to Whitfield Lodge from a hotel in the city where she had managed a smaller property with 32 rooms and a seasonal restaurant. She had come because the mountains made sense to her in a way that lobbies with marble floors did not, and because the listing said lodge manager with an emphasis on manager. What the listing had not said was that Dale Whitfield had been appointed general manager by the parent hospitality group 18 months before her arrival, and that Dale's understanding of hierarchy placed him several rungs above the lodge's day-to-day needs and several rungs below the parent group's principles, in a gap where he exercised his authority with the thoroughness of a man who had not been given quite enough of it. Marcus Reed had been at the lodge for 4 years. He worked the morning desk and the afternoon supplies rotation, and he had the dry, patient humour of someone who had watched a great many people take themselves too seriously in a space that looked out over a mountain range every morning. He was Nora's most reliable co-worker and, on the nights when Dale's management style was particularly thorough, her most reliable company. He had a way of appearing at the supply corridor door with 2 mugs of coffee and saying nothing useful for exactly as long as nothing useful needed to be said. It was Marcus who spotted the new arrival first. The car was a rental, which was not unusual. Most guests rented from the airport 40 minutes south. What was unusual was that Dale met it at the front entrance himself, which he did not do for ordinary guests, and that the conversation on the steps lasted longer than a check-in acknowledgement warranted, and that afterward Dale came inside with an expression Marcus described to Nora as someone who swallowed something that didn't agree with him. Richard Mitchell was Dale's cousin in the way that geography is distant, technically accurate and practically invisible. They had grown up in households that occupied different tax brackets and different understandings of what family meant, and the relationship between them had always been managed through the parent hospitality group's administrative calendar, rather than through any genuine warmth. Richard had a majority stake in the parent group. Dale had a licensing arrangement with the lodge. Richard had asked through the group's office to use the lodge for 4 days, without announcement. Dale had agreed because he had no practical alternative, and he had introduced Richard to the staff as "my cousin from the city, just here for a rest," which was accurate in the same way that describing the ocean as damp is accurate. Nora was at the front desk when they came in. She was going through the evening's reservation list, one finger tracking the page while her eyes caught the 2 figures crossing the lobby. She registered Dale's posture first because Dale's posture was the first thing anyone on staff registered when he entered a room. He was performing ease, which meant he was not at ease. The man beside him was carrying a single canvas bag and wearing a coat that was clean and plain and told her nothing. His face was unhurried. His eyes moved over the lobby the way someone looks at a room they are trying to understand, not admire. He took in the line of the front desk and the height of the rafters and the angle of the light through the lobby windows in the same accumulating sweep. And Nora, who had spent 2 years watching guests not see the room they had paid to come to, registered without quite meaning to register that this man saw it. The canvas bag at his side had the soft, creased shape of a bag that had been packed by the same hand many times, and the coat at his shoulders fell with the weight of good wool that had been worn long enough to belong to him rather than to a label. "Room 7, Dale said to Nora in the tone he used when he was demonstrating something to someone. "Mr. Mitchell, 4 nights." Nora wrote it down, located the key on the brass rack, and slid it across the counter. "Welcome to Whitfield Lodge," she said. "Breakfast is served from 7 to 10. Dinner from 6 to 9. If you need anything during your stay, the front desk has someone on through midnight." Richard Mitchell looked at her for a moment, not the way guests looked when they were waiting for her to finish so they could ask about the spa or the ski rental or the parking. He looked with the attention of someone who was listening to all of it, including the part she had not said. The look was not long enough to be unsettling, and not short enough to be the polite skim of a man checking in for the night. And Nora felt it, briefly, the way she sometimes felt a draft when an outer door had been opened in a part of the lodge she could not see. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, unhurried, and they landed with a weight that had nothing to do with volume. Dale moved Richard toward the stairs before the exchange could continue, and Nora went back to her reservation list. She noted that the room was correctly prepared. She noted that the guest was quiet and attentive, and not the kind of person who would complain about fork alignment. She noted, and then filed away, the fact that Dale had met him at the door himself, and returned to the work in front of her. That evening, the dining room was overbooked by 2 tables through a reservation error that had compounded through a software update Dale had insisted on installing the week prior. Nora discovered it at 5:40, which gave her 20 minutes to manage it before the first guests arrived. She moved 3 parties, extended 2 reservations, and located a table in the corner near the fireplace that had been held off the floor for staff use during a long shift. It was her table. She had been on since 6 that morning, and she had eaten nothing since a piece of bread at noon. And the table was the one place she had arranged to sit down for 30 minutes at 8 o'clock and have something warm. She pulled the staff card from the table holder, set a fresh arrangement on the surface, and walked it back into the dining room rotation. She gave it to Richard Mitchell because he had arrived at the desk at 6:15, asking if there was a table available, and because she had watched Dale steer him away from the dining room entrance with a vague gesture toward the lounge, and she had seen Richard's expression, which was the expression of someone who did not want the lounge and was too polite to say so. She led him to the corner table herself, set the menu in front of him, and said, "This one's better for a quiet evening anyway. The fireplace actually draws properly." Richard looked at her. Did someone give this up? "Logistics," she said, which was honest, and she turned back to the floor before the question could become a conversation. She felt his attention follow her across the dining room for the length of one full pass, and she felt also that the attention was not the kind that asked anything of her, only the kind that registered her crossing the room as a fact in the room, and she did not know at the time whether the attention was a thing she ought to be glad about or a thing she ought to file with the other small things that did not yet have a place to be filed. He sat there for 2 hours. She noticed, not because she was watching, but because the corner table was in her sight line whenever she crossed between the kitchen and the service station, and Richard Mitchell was not the kind of presence a room absorbed without acknowledgement. He read through most of the meal, a book she did not recognize, spine up on the table beside his plate. He ate slowly and without any apparent dissatisfaction. He did not summon her, did not wave at passing staff, did not check his phone at the table once in 2 hours. The fireplace caught the side of his face in a soft, moving light, and twice during the service she crossed the dining room and saw the light find a small line at the corner of his mouth that was either the beginning of a smile or the residue of one, and she could not tell which because she had not been there to see what had landed before her crossing. The hand that turned the page of his book was neither soft nor heavy, but the kind of hand a person developed when reading and outdoor work occupied the same week. And the watch on his wrist, the band of which she could see when his sleeve slipped at the page turn, was a plain steel band on a plain steel face. The kind of thing a person bought once and stopped thinking about. She found that particular. Marcus brought her a plate at 9:30 when the room had thinned. He set it on the prep counter without ceremony and said, "You gave away your table again." It was available. It was not available. Your name was on it in your own writing. "Logistics," she said, and he made the sound he made when he knew she was deflecting and had decided to allow it this once. He set a second cup of water beside the plate without comment, the small, habitual courtesy of a man who had been handing her water glasses for 4 years, and he stood at the counter for 1 beat longer than the conversation required before he turned back into the dining room. Nora ate the plate slowly. She was tired in the deep, settled way she was tired most nights of a full service, and the food was good, and the corner table was still in her sight line, and Richard Mitchell had not yet finished his book. The next day was cold and bright, the kind of morning the lodge looked its best in. Snow on the pines, smoke from both chimneys, the dining room full at 8 for breakfast, and clear again by 9:30. Nora was at the front desk covering a gap in the rotation when Richard came down from room 7 with his book under his arm and stopped at the counter without an apparent request. "Is there a trail from the east side of the property?" he asked. Nora pulled the trail map from the rack beside the key hooks. It was a map she had drawn herself 18 months ago, because the one the lodge had been using placed the East Ridge Trail in the wrong direction, and she had watched 3 guests get turned around in a single week. She pointed to the trail she was thinking of, showed him where the switchback was, mentioned the place where the ice tended to pool in the morning shade, and didn't clear until after 11. Richard listened. He asked one question about the elevation change at the ridge, and she told him, and he wrote a small note at the corner of the map in pencil. The pencil was a short stub he carried in his coat pocket, the eraser worn flat, the kind of pencil a person had used long enough that he did not bother to retire it for a new one. He said thank you again. It landed the same way as the night before. She watched him cross the lobby toward the east entrance and then return to the desk, and she had the odd, sideways thought that she could not remember the last time a guest had asked about the trail and then actually written down what she told them, and the thought stayed with her longer than she expected because it surfaced again at 3 different moments through the morning, each time as a small settling in her chest she did not have a name for. That afternoon, Dale and his wife Celia arrived together in the main corridor near the coat room. Celia Whitfield performed the lodge the way she performed everywhere she went, checking surfaces for dust, touching tablecloths and pulling her fingers back with an expression that communicated she had expected to find something wrong and was slightly disappointed to find the linens clean. She had a particular way of addressing staff through Dale, speaking to him as though the staff member were a speaker on the other side of a wall that only Dale could hear clearly. Richard came in from the East Trail at 4 o'clock, coat damp at the shoulders, the trail map folded in his jacket pocket. He passed through the lobby without stopping, nodded to Nora at the desk, and went upstairs. Dale, standing near the corridor with Celia, watched him pass and then said to Celia, in the clear but lowered register of a man who did not believe the lobby had ears. He's just here to look around. The group sends someone every year. You just give them good rooms and good meals, and they go back to the city and write a report that says everything is fine. Celia turned towards the staircase. Will it be? It's always fine. He's not operational. He looks at numbers. Nora heard that. She was 8 feet away, and the lobby acoustics were what they were, and she heard it. She did not know what it meant exactly, but she stored it with the same careful attention she gave to the East Ridge Trail and the water glass and the fork alignment, something to know and to hold quietly. That evening, Dale moved through the dining room with Celia beside him, and his smile set at the width he used for guests he found valuable. He stopped at Richard's table, the corner table again, because Nora had given it to him again without announcement. He made the kind of conversation that men like Dale made with relatives they needed to present well, careful, measured, tipping toward warmth without committing to it. Richard answered in even sentences. He thanked Dale for the recommendation of the lodge's lamb dish. He asked a single question about the East Wing renovation that Dale did not answer with any precision, and for a moment the table went still in a way that Nora, passing with a bread basket, registered as the particular stillness of a conversation where one person knows something the other person does not know. They know. On the third day, Nora did not see Richard until the afternoon. She had been in the linen storage from 8 until noon, working through a delivery error that had sent the wrong thread count on 60 sheets, and then in the kitchen until 2, settling a catering schedule that had been altered without her sign-off. She came out to the front desk at 2:30 and found Marcus at the counter with an expression she recognized. "Dale briefed the kitchen staff this morning," Marcus said, keeping his voice at the register of someone discussing weather. "Said he's reviewing the management structure. Said some roles might need to be more clearly defined. He reviews the management structure every 6 months. He said it in front of the full kitchen rotation, including the new hire." Nora straightened the guest register on the counter. She set the pen parallel to the edge of the book. "Then I'll manage it when it comes." "It's already coming," Marcus said. And then the lobby door opened, and he was moving toward an incoming guest, and the conversation closed. She understood, without Marcus having to finish it, that Dale was building a record. He had been building it for months in small increments, through the public corrections and the tone adjustments and the management structure reviews, and the conversation she'd overheard the evening before had crystallized something she had been refusing to name. She was, in Dale's estimation, temporary. He had decided that before she arrived, and she had been proving him wrong with every season, and he had not changed his estimation 1 degree. That evening she sat in the supply corridor on a low stool, eating a plate Marcus had brought her again, and she told him, because she was tired in the honest way and not the performative way, that she had stopped expecting to be seen clearly by anyone in this building. She said it plainly, without inflection, the way she said things she had decided were true. "I don't mean I'm giving up," she said. "I mean I've adjusted. It's a different thing." "It's not that different," Marcus said. "I know what I'm doing here. I know the East Ridge Trail and the linen inventory, and which of the 22 rooms has the heater that cycles loud at 3 in the morning. That's worth something. It just doesn't get seen." She paused. She set her fork down. "The man in room 7 sees it," she said, and then seemed to be surprised that she had said it. "He listens when I explain something. He writes things down. I don't know. It's a small thing." She looked at the corridor wall for a moment as if she could see through it to the corner table at the far end of the lodge. "I gave him my reservation table the first night. He asked if someone had given it up, and I said logistics, and he didn't push. He let me keep the lie. There's something in the way he didn't push. It's hard to put it where I can name it." What she did not know was that Richard had come down from room 7 at 6:50 to retrieve a jacket he had left in the coat room adjacent to the supply corridor, and that the door was standing 3 inches open on its latch, and that the corridor carried sound the way corridors in old lodge buildings always carry sound, cleanly and without ceremony. He stood inside the coat room and did not move. He held the jacket in both hands and he listened to every word she said, including the part about the East Ridge Trail and the heater in room 12 and the 2 years of watching, and the part about the man in room 7, which came to him with a weight that he felt in his sternum and did not put down. He came out when she and Marcus had gone back inside. He stood in the empty corridor for a moment. Then he went upstairs. On the morning of the 4th day, which was the last day of his stay, Richard came down early. The dining room was still being set, chairs being arranged, and place settings laid by 2 of the junior staff. One of them, a young woman named Petra, who had been at the lodge for 3 months, was in the middle of folding napkins when Dale came through the service door and stopped in front of her table. "These are wrong," Dale said. "The fold is wrong. The shape is wrong. How long have you been doing this?" "Mr. Whitfield, I learned it from the training card you approved." "The training card is a reference, not an excuse. When the result is wrong, the reference doesn't matter." Petra's hands went still on the napkin. She was 23 and she had driven 40 minutes each way every day for 3 months to hold down this job, and the fold was not wrong, and everyone in the room who was old enough to know the difference knew it was not wrong. Nora came in from the kitchen door with the breakfast prep schedule in her hand. She took in the room in the 3 seconds it took her to cross from the door to Dale's position, which was enough time to see Petra's expression and the napkin and the 6 other staff members finding sudden work to do at their respective stations. "The fold is right," Nora said. She said it the same way she set a fork down. Flat, final, without decoration. "It matches the instruction sheet and it matches what we've been setting for 2 years. If there's a new standard, I'd like to see it written down." Dale turned. The room held its breath. "I'll speak to you privately," Dale said. "Of course," she said, and she did not move. The private conversation happened in Dale's office at 10:30, with Celia present, which was a new development and a signal Nora recognized. Dale used the word restructuring twice. He used the phrase management fit once. He said that her style of engagement with staff, while well-intentioned, created confusion about the chain of authority, and that the lodge's standards required a general manager who could enforce them without countermand from below. Nora listened. She asked one question. "Is this a formal review or a termination?" Dale said, "We'll address that at the end of the week." She went back to work. At 6 that evening, the dining room filled for what was, in the ordinary run of things, an ordinary dinner service. Richard Mitchell had brought his bag down to the front desk at 4, checked out with Marcus, and settled his bill. Marcus had walked him through the departure paperwork with the routine attention he gave to every checkout. Richard had said, quietly, that he hoped to come back. Marcus had the particular instinct of someone who had been watching a room for 4 years. And what he said, also quietly, was, "I think you will." At 6:40, Dale brought the full dining room staff into the room for what he called a brief operational update before service. All 12 of them. Nora stood at the back near the kitchen door. The door behind them was open to the lobby. Dale said, in the voice he used when he had made a decision and framed it as a fact already belonging to the world, that he was accepting Nora's resignation effective at the end of the current period, in light of recent performance concerns. The room went very quiet. Nora had not resigned. Every person in the room knew she had not resigned. The word resignation was doing work it had not been authorized to do. And in the stillness after Dale said it, she could hear the exact quality of the silence that 12 people produce When they know, they are watching something being falsified and are uncertain what to do with what they know. She was about to speak, and she had decided what she would say, which was the measured and final thing it needed to be, when she heard the lobby door. Richard Mitchell walked through it with a manila envelope in one hand and a look on his face that was the same face he had worn every time she had seen him. Unhurried, composed, and paying close attention. He crossed the lobby. He came to the dining room threshold and stopped there. He looked at Dale. Dale looked at him. Something moved across Dale's face that was not quite recognition and not quite fear, and was located somewhere between the two. "I stepped out for a walk," Richard said. "I left an envelope at the front desk. Could someone retrieve it?" Dale's assistant, a young man named Owen, who had been at the desk all afternoon and who had in fact signed for a delivery from the Parent Hospitality Group's legal office at 3 o'clock, went to the desk and came back with a sealed envelope and set it on the near table. Richard said, "Would you open it, please?" Owen looked at Dale. Dale looked at the envelope. He did not tell Owen to open it, but he did not tell him not to, and the silence was the same as permission. Owen unfolded the letter and read it in the private way people read things they expect to pass along, and then he read it again, and then he read it aloud because the room was waiting, and there was no other reasonable direction to go. The letter was from the Parent Hospitality Group's principal office. It named the property, the lodge, and the licensing arrangement under which Dale operated. It noted the conclusion of a review period. It noted, in the plain legal language of property instruments, that the majority stakeholder and designated principal of the group had exercised his right to resume direct operational oversight of the property effective immediately. It named Richard Mitchell as that principal, his full name, his title, the length of his stake in the group, which had been majority since his father's death 4 years prior. The room did not make a sound. Celia, who had come in from the corridor 10 minutes into the service briefing and stood near the wall, set her wineglass down on the nearest surface and left it there. Dale opened his mouth. He said, "Aye." He stopped. He said, "The arrangement was." He stopped again. His sentences were doing the same thing his authority had just done, ending before they found their shape. "The arrangement was a licensing structure," Richard said. "That's correct. The licensing period is concluded." He paused. "The letter's clean. Nothing was done improperly." He looked at Owen. "Thank you." Owen folded the letter and held it and looked at his shoes. Richard looked at the room. The 12 staff members, the unlit fireplace, the white linen tables set for a service that had not yet started. Then he looked at Nora. "I believe you were in the middle of something," he said. Nora had been still through all of it, with the stillness she had been practicing for 2 years, the kind that is not passive, but is a different form of active, the kind that costs you something every day you maintain it and earns you nothing you can point to. "Mr. Whitfield was announcing my resignation," she said. "I haven't resigned." Richard turned to Dale. "Then there's no resignation on the record." Dale's mouth opened. There were performance concerns that warranted. "I'll review the record," Richard said. "If there are documented concerns, we'll review them together. If there aren't documented concerns, the record will reflect that." He did not raise his voice. He did not change his tempo. "Nora Calloway is the lodge manager. She stays in that position until a formal review process, conducted properly, indicates otherwise. That's the standard." Dale said nothing. Celia had removed herself from the wall and was now near the door, and appeared to be calculating the exact social geometry required to exit without it reading as flight. It read as flight anyway. Richard said to the room, "Dinner service should start on time." And then he stepped back from the doorway to let Nora through. She walked the length of the dining room, She had 12 people watching her walk it, and she walked it the way she had walked every floor of this building for 2 years. Evenly, without performance, hands free, spine straight. She passed Richard at the doorway. She did not look at him directly. She felt him as one feels a familiar presence in a room one has not yet decided to acknowledge, the slight steadiness at the edge of the air. And she carried that steadiness with her past the threshold and into the kitchen door. She went to the kitchen door and told the prep team to begin, and then she came back to the floor and managed the first table. It was a clean service. The lamb dish went out correctly. The fireplace drew properly. The water glasses sat at exactly the distance from the plate's edge that indicated care without obsession. Marcus brought 2 cups of coffee at 9:15 when the last table was finishing its dessert and the room had thinned to a comfortable quiet. He set one on the service station counter and looked at Nora with the expression of a man who had been right about something for a long time, and was satisfied not to say so at length. 4 days, he said. 4 days, she agreed. He wrote things down. She looked at him. I know. The East Ridge Trail, the heater in room 12. Marcus turned his mug in his hands. The man in room 7. Nora was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the snow was falling again, the same as it had fallen every night she had been here, steady and silent against the lit windows and the dark pines. The lodge was her building in a way she had known for a long time without anyone confirming it. And tonight, the confirmation had arrived not in the form she would have expected, but in the form of a letter read aloud by a 22-year-old assistant who had simply done what the room asked of him. She had not performed her way to this moment. She had not schemed toward it. She had set the tables and walked the trails and given her dinner reservation to a quiet man who wrote down what she told him, because that was who she was when no one important was watching. The fact that someone had been watching was not the point. The point was that she had not changed anything in anticipation of it. She thought of the 4 days. She thought of the trail map and the elevation note and the corner table that had been hers, and then his, and then theirs in some quieter shared accounting. She thought of the way he had asked on the first night whether someone had given the table up, and the way he had let her keep her small, offered lie, because he had understood before he had any context for understanding it, that the lie was a kindness offered to the lodge and not a deception offered to him. And a man capable of that distinction was a man worth filing under a different heading from the rest. She had filed him there without quite realizing she had filed him at all. Richard Mitchell came into the dining room at 9:40 when it was nearly empty. The corner table by the fireplace was the only table still set. He crossed toward it, and then he stopped. "Sit down," Nora said from the service station. "The fireplace draws properly. You told me you knew that." There was a pause that had the character of a smile without the movement. "I did," he said, and he sat down. She watched him from the service station the way she had watched him for 4 days, except that watching him now had a different weight to it, the weight of a thing she had been allowed to know. He had heard her in the supply corridor on the 3rd evening. He had stood with his jacket in both hands and listened, and then come down the next morning and listened again. And now he was sitting at the corner table by the fireplace, with his book closed beside his cup, looking at the fire. And she understood that the listening had not been a transaction. It had simply been the kind of attention he gave to things. And the only difference between her and the next person who walked through this lobby was that she had said something to a co-worker in a corridor, while a stranger had been in the next room with a jacket in his hands. She brought him coffee without asking. She set it in front of him with the same hand she had used to fold napkins and correct linen inventory, and steady a water glass through every shift of the last 2 years. The cup made the small, clean sound it made on the linen, and his hand came up to receive it without quite touching her hand, the small, careful gap a man maintained who had not yet been given permission to close it, and she felt the gap, and felt that he was holding it for her sake, and not for his own. It was the same hand doing the same careful thing in a building that was now, finally, allowed to know what she was worth. She went back to the service station. The room held the particular warmth of a space that has been properly looked after by someone who knew what they were doing. And finally, on a snowy night in the 4th year of her working life, the room was allowed to belong to that fact. Marcus left at 10, pausing at the service station long enough to collect his mug, look once at the corner table, and then at Nora, and say, with the economy he reserved for things that did not need decoration, "Good." She turned off the kitchen lights at 10:30 and came back through the dining room with the last pass of the evening, checking each table in the way she always checked: the fold of the napkins, the alignment of the cutlery, the angle of the chairs against the tables. Everything was right. Everything had been right in this room for 2 years. At the threshold, she stopped. She looked at the corner table where Richard sat with his book open and his coffee cup half full, the firelight on the white linen and the snow at the window behind him. He looked up the way he had looked up every time she passed, fully, without hurry, without any distance in it. She did not say anything. There was nothing that needed saying. She let her hand rest on the doorframe for one moment, feeling the lodge settle around her, its 22 rooms, and its 12 staff members, and its 2 chimneys, and its East Ridge Trail, and the heater in room 12, that cycled loud at 3 in the morning, all of it known and held and hers in every way that mattered. She thought, with the small, unhurried surprise a person carries about her own life when the life turns toward her again, that there was a man at the corner table in a coat she had not yet learned the cost or origin of, and that he had been sitting there for 4 nights and was sitting there now, and that she had not arranged any of it and would not have known how to. She thought that she would carry his coffee into him again before he left for the night, and that she would not say anything in particular about the 4 days, because there was nothing in particular that needed saying, and because the saying that mattered had already been done, in a corridor with a jacket in a man's hands. She took one step across the threshold into the lit corridor.